From the Citizens Bank studio, welcome to the Ricky Matthews Show, where every day we talk about the amazing people who are working so hard to make this place, Mississippi, such a great place to live, work, and play. Hey, I want to look back just a little bit. We had a series of amazing shows, and if you miss them, you can go to Facebook or YouTube or your favorite podcast and listen to them or watch them. I had a really terrific conversation with a guy by the name of James Skrmetta. I've known the Skrmetta family here in Biloxi for many years, and James has gone on to New Orleans after he worked at the Sun Herald for a brief period of time, did some other things. He's actually in the public relations business in New Orleans, and on the side, he has an NFL/Saints YouTube channel, and it's one of the faster growing YouTube channels in a sea of competitors in New Orleans. He had over 1 million views this past year. And it's just a really interesting conversation about a guy from Biloxi who really knew what he wanted to do. He was willing to take the risks. And there was a point in time when he said that he was at the Sun Herald. They said, you're doing a good job with your YouTube channel. We want you to do this for us. But they were going to define what it is he needed to get into. And he didn't really want to do that. He really wanted to talk sports all the time, and that's what he did. But again, willing to take the risk, willing to get into basically the sea of competitors and do what you got to do to compete as an entrepreneur. Not an easy decision. I had a great conversation with Austin Summerall. He's the chef at White Pillars and did really well in a couple of TV shows, most recently Chops. He's got another one coming up. They're going to be opening a new restaurant in downtown Gulfport. We talked about that. He actually broke that news on my show. But Austin's just a good example of an entrepreneur that had been around cooking his whole life and eventually came into owning his own restaurant, what is formerly the White Pillars. I worked at the White Pillars in the 1970s when I was in high school. What an amazing building, what an amazing restaurant. But to put a sort of a modern flair on that, he's doing a great job with his wife, Tressie. And then I had a terrific conversation with James Wynn, who is the director of digital for SuperTalk Mississippi Media. And we talked about why, if you're not satisfied with your digital direction right now of your company, that you ought to call James and the team at SuperTalk Mississippi Media at STMM Digital, STMMdigital.com. And it's SuperTalk Mississippi Media Digital. Okay, so they'll do a free audit of your situation and give you some advice. I think you'll be glad you did. A lot of people are a little bit intimidated by the digital side of things, and sometimes when you look at your dashboards on your digital, you're just not happy with what you see, and ultimately you're not happy with the results, and that's super important to be focused on results. And then lastly, JT Mitchell, the director of news at SuperTalk Mississippi News, he's going to be joining me here on the show more regularly. This team is doing an amazing job. It's all Mississippi all the time at SuperTalk Mississippi News, especially during the legislative session. So if you haven't signed up for the SuperTalk newsletter, I'd really encourage you to do so. It is very, very good. And me being a former news guy, I can really appreciate what this great team at SuperTalk Mississippi News is doing. They are doing well, and JT Mitchell has been a terrific leader of that effort. So now let's shift gears. In a future show, I'm going to share the Man in the Arena by Theodore Roosevelt. I was going to do it today, but I don't have enough time to do it. We refer to it all the time. I've read it before. But it really gives a lot of props to people in the community, essentially, who are willing to get in and as he says, have their faces marred by dust and sweat and blood. That's what it often takes when you get out in the community. But someone I really admire, who was the former the former president of the Gulf Coast Business Council. He's an entrepreneur in Mississippi doing work really beyond Mississippi these days. And he's also a SuperTalk Mississippi News column contributor, and that's Ashley Edwards. How you doing, Ashley?
Hey, Ricky. Good morning. I'm doing great. Good to be with you.
So you heard me mention JT Mitchell and the team at SuperTalk, but man, with a small team, this team is knocking it out of the park, aren't they?
They're doing a great job, and it's gotten to the point now where I see a lot of the breaking news in Mississippi on SuperTalk before I see it anywhere else. I'll see a SuperTalk Mississippi News tweet or post or things like that, and so they're doing a bang up job. And given the size of the team, this is one of the best news organizations in the state right now, no question.
It really is. It's sad, unfortunately, if you look at the state of the news media today. Just as an example, there were 50 reporters, employees at the Sun Herald when I left there in 2009, and I think they have less than 5 today in the newsroom. And admire every one of them. They are all terrific reporters, and this is not about them, but it's about the situation they face. With not having the resources to do the job. I also think that the company that owns the Sun Herald is a venture capital fund. Should be focused more on the digital side of things. What I've seen is too many newspapers have focused on keeping print alive. I think print died about 10 years ago, and nobody gave it a funeral. But the reality is they should have been using the resources that they had at the time and shifting them to digital so they could have more of a digital footprint. But what's happened is because they spent so much money trying to keep print going and they don't have the resources to fill the space, you need to only look as far as, say, their Facebook page, and you'll see so much news from Indiana and California and Florida, whereas it used to be all local news. What I love about what's happened at SuperTalk Mississippi News is it's all Mississippi news all the time. So the newsletter is terrific. The news effort is terrific. And especially during the legislative session, when folks come on to our shows and talk, it creates this incredible bed of news opportunities for them as they mine those shows for news. It's just a cool setup. And then we have contributors like you who are giving, commenting about a wide range of subjects. It's just cool. I'm very pleased with the job that they're doing. Any other thing about that before we move on?
Well, look, I think it's interesting because very much when you look at the sort of the fall of the daily newspapers across the U.S., there was a huge vacuum created. And so it's great to see an organization like SuperTalk Mississippi through its news division stepping in to fill that vacuum in a meaningful way. And one of the things, Ricky, that I really appreciate about SuperTalk's coverage is it's fact-based, it's immediate, and it gives people the information they need to know. And so I like the fact that, you think about a radio station, a radio network that has a lot of folks on that are opinion hosts, but the news division is really very different from that. I write a lot of opinion columns, but in terms of, giving people the news, I mean, they're Johnny on the spot. So they're doing a great job.
Actually, I think that's a great point. SuperTalk Mississippi Media, this company is the 12 SuperTalk stations that are geographically located around the state, but it's also 14 other radio stations that are also spread across the state. Here on the coast, WCPR, The Monkey, others. So what's happening is the news is not only going to the stations that are part of the 12 radio stations that are part of SuperTalk Network, but they also go to all these other radio stations. And in addition to that, another, a total of 51 radio stations across the state. So another, 25 other radio stations that the news is going to that don't belong to SuperTalk Mississippi Media. So if you make news on this show, it's possible a story is going to come out of it that goes to the SuperTalk News website. It's going to go to the app. It's going to be at supertalk.fm. It's going to be in the newsletter. It's potentially going to be part of our shows because we talk about the news all the time. And then it's going to be part of the news, the news programming that goes to all of these different radio stations. So it's a powerful voice. We have the opinion host, that's for sure, but the objective journalistic effort by SuperTalk Mississippi News kind of stands alone as one of the better in the state. That's for sure. I appreciate you pointing that out.
Well, hey, listen, along those lines, you think about your days as a newspaper publisher and the fact that things were always measured and based on circulation. And when you think about the number of people who are tuning in, looking at the various digital platforms, SuperTalk News, the circulation in the state of Mississippi is like none other. There's nobody that can really compete with that. So in this sort of new age of media, what a great time for a group like SuperTalk to step up and fill a vacuum that's been left by sort of the degradation of a lot of the weekly and daily newspapers out there.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, the voice is very, very powerful. You know what's interesting is I have actually problems with how they measure radio audience. Believe it or not, they're still using diaries where people write into a diary. You would think that modern technology would have long since sort of taken over, but it hasn't. There's some other approaches that the company is looking into, and I think beginning to deploy, that are a little bit more digital based and a little bit more accurate. But it's a great point. I mean, when you have this multimedia footprint where when you are wherever, however people want to interact with you, and good Lord knows there's so many choices now because of the digital platforms that are available. When you do that, you're going to touch a lot of people. And then, by the way, then when you get onto something like teen suicide, a real important project that we're focused on this year, you can really make a difference because you're talking to legislators, you're talking to key leaders in the state, you're talking to people who have the resources to give, and you can really enact change when you touch a lot of people. Hey, when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Ashley Edwards. Welcome back to Super Talk and the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank studio. I have my friend Ashley Edwards with us today, and we're just catching up and visiting. Ashley, you and I have had a lot of conversations about leadership over the years, and it's been interesting watching you because you have you worked for multiple governors. You've been involved in disaster recovery. You have a part of your business today that's still focused on disaster recovery. You were the president of the Gulf Coast Business Council, and now you're sort of in the private sector doing entrepreneurial work. But whether you're a leader in the community or running your business, when you decide to step out there, you're going to take risk. And you heard the little excerpt I read from The Man in the Mirror by Theodore Roosevelt. But how does it feel? Contrast being sort of in the public sector, working for an organization like Gulf Coast Business Council, now being sort of in private business. How's that going for you?
Well, it's going really well, Ricky, but it's a lot more difficult than I thought it would be, and I think that's probably the experience of a lot of entrepreneurs out there. The stakes are always higher, and I wouldn't have necessarily thought that before because it always felt like with the things I've done and either working, in disaster recovery or working at the business council, there were always high stakes issues. But on the same note, it's a very tough, very competitive marketplace. And you have to win on doing really, really good work. And there are lots of competitors out there who will step in and do it if you don't. And so I've enjoyed it a lot. It's been a really good experience. I've got to expand my horizons quite a bit. We're doing a lot of work and really across the Southeast in a number of states now. And we're working on a lot of great projects, things that I'm very proud of. But on the same note, it's a tough, competitive marketplace. And, I think especially in this day and age, the challenge is how do you constantly innovate and how do you constantly stay ahead of the curve? And, the things that worked in business 10 years ago don't work today. The things that work 10 years from now will be vastly different because we're living in a time of such explosive change. Just over the course of the last year, the amount that I use artificial intelligence on a day-to-day basis is incredible. And if you had asked me a year ago if I would have any AI in my business whatsoever, I would have told you, how in the world would that even happen? I would have had no conception of how that happened. And so it's amazing the pace of change that we see. And so a lot of what I think about day to day is, how do you stay on top of that? How do you stay ahead of the curve? How do you stay on the cutting edge? How are you doing things to make sure your clients and your customers are going to be able to interact with you using technology and that you're doing the things to kind of remain competitive? And so it's exciting in a lot of ways. It's also very intimidating because, the world that we wake up in 2025 is going to be vastly different than the world we're waking up in 2024. And then you start to think about 2030, which will be here before we know it. It's going to be even that much different than what we see today. And so I'm just really struck by how quickly the economy is evolving, how quickly technology is evolving, and almost feeling like I have to keep up.
Hey, we'll come back to AI in a minute because you and I have had many conversations offline about that. We'll chat a little bit more about that. But just the point about the entrepreneurial effort. It's hard. It is hard. When I was involved in helping transition print media to digital media, really tough. I mean, you have cultural issues that are engaged in that, tremendous technology issues. Every day something's changing. The number of competitors is literally almost infinite. It's tough, and you got to bring people along. At the end of this, the man in the arena, it says this. Who at best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. I mean, you learn a lot about victory and defeat when you're out there literally in the competitive world. But that's what keeps us sharp. Competition makes you better. Competition makes you want to sort of sharpen the saw and get better at what you do. And, it makes you better. I mean, at the end of the day, doesn't it?
Well, it does. And, in many ways, sort of my mantra for almost my New Year's resolution, so to speak, was how do we get 1% better every single day? It's easy to kind of wake up and say, hey, I'm going to make these wholesale changes and do things totally different. That's usually not achievable. But what is achievable is to constantly tweak and improve what you're doing and make those kind of constant improvements. And so much of what I'm focused on in my mind day to day now is how do we, continue to tweak and create efficiencies in each little step in the process. And I think that's really what it takes to be very successful in business. It's, evolving with the marketplace, staying abreast of what your competitors are doing. You can't just be inward looking all the time, and sort of looking at what your customers and clients expect. And so, and there are a lot of small business people out there that are going through that on a day-to-day basis. Gone are the days that you can rely on the same recipe or same formula over and over and over to take you through years of sustained success. And so, we've been very fortunate, Ricky. We work in a market segment that allows us to really interact with a lot of community leadership and work on big projects and big things that bring about a lot of changes in communities. And you think about these disaster ravaged communities and, the rebuilding that's occurring, or economic development projects that are going to bring hundreds or thousands of jobs in some cases to areas. And so, I'm very blessed to be able to work on those things. But even those things are done so much different than they were 5 years ago. And so, what we want to do really is be a leader in that market segment and continue to evolve with the market.
I often say that those who succeed are the ones who burn the midnight oil. I mean, in other words, you got to do your homework. I mean, really, to be honest with you, to do this show, I'm very committed on doing my homework on a regular basis. And this whole notion of continuously improving, I've said on my show, and you and I have chatted about this before, but I think the more we learn, the more we better learn how much we don't know. And that keeps you humble. And that humility is what drives you to want to learn more. So I think the older we get, the more we want to learn, the more the technology being a great example of that, the ever changing, unbelievably rapidly changing technological environment that is there, whether you're in the marketing or advertising business or running any kind of company that makes goods and services, or maybe you're in the the disaster relief and helping cities get better in the kind of business that you're in. But the reality is, the use of technology is a foregone conclusion. You got to do it, and with advanced artificial intelligence coming online so rapidly, I mean, listen, they introduced AI that's there for anyone to use, and then suddenly, just like overnight, it's taken the world by storm. I mean, we have our concerns about AI, but as it relates to running the business and helping you develop strategic plans and helping you understand what's the vast knowledge out there and how it might apply to solving this particular problem, it is uncannily good at making your situation better, isn't it?
Look, I found a lot of use for it. I mean, generative AI is great when we're having to compose long grant applications, and we have to integrate a lot of, sort of standard language from federal code and things like that. Being able to give prompts and generate, thousands and thousands of words instantaneously. In many ways, what AI has become is, it's become the equivalent of 3 or 4 support employees that you would have to train and have to manage. And it's instantaneous and it's cheap. And so, it's going to change our economy in a lot of ways. And I think we're only starting to see glimpses of how that's going to happen. But, the AI companies, the folks that are on the cutting edge of that, you look at the explosive growth that's happened in that market. And again, what we see today has only scratched the surface of where this is going. And you think about, 5 years from now, just sort of the technological framework across the globe and the trillions upon trillions of sensors that will be integrated into every piece of technology that's out there. And then AI being able to take that instantaneous data from all of these sensors and inputs and then give you conclusions based on that immediately. It's going to change the paradigm in a way that we can hardly conceive of now. And so, I think the challenge for businesses, the challenge for government is how to be on the cutting edge and get the benefit of that. You see across the board kind of the concerns about AI, and I share those concerns, but the applications of AI in day-to-day business or day-to-day operations are really infinite. And to the extent that we're using it, I always feel very guilty about the fact that I haven't taken deeper dives to figure out how to get more bandwidth out of it. And so, I can see very clearly today that AI is going to be an integral part of our business going forward. Whereas, again, 12 months ago, that would not have even been on my radar.
Well, your use of AI is only as good as the query made, and the more educated and the more thoughtful the query, the better the result's going to be. And then, of course, the ability to refine as you go. It gives me immediately a really good framework for how to think about something, especially if I'm entering a show with someone that I haven't talked to before and I want to get up to speed on a particular topic. Really, really good stuff. Hey, when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Ashley Edwards. We'll see you after this. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank studio. We're having a conversation with my friend Ashley Edwards, who's a coastal Mississippi entrepreneur, but also the former president and CEO of the Gulf Coast Business Council. And he's also a column contributor to SuperTalk Mississippi News. Hey, listen, I want one other point on AI. I hired a guy when I was the president of NOLA Media Group who was the VP of sales. And when he left our company, he left to further his career. He went to work for Salesforce.com. And, Salesforce.com is one of the most successful companies in America. He had a very significant position there. And I thought, wow, this is perfect for him. He wrote a book about sales and just understood the sales process really well. Well, anyway, he's been doing really well there. But I noticed on Facebook the other day that he announced that he's leaving Salesforce.com. I mean, his dream job, this amazing job. And he's joining this startup company as the VP of sales for the startup company. And it's a startup company that's going to be focused on business applications of AI. That's the business. And I'm like, wow, this guy, he amazes me the way he's willing to jump into it and go. But I mean, he wouldn't have, listen, I know him to be a thoughtful guy, so he would not have joined this group of investors and entrepreneurs if they didn't have something that turned him on that he could do well with. But we're going to see a lot more companies like that evolving, Ashley, literally just companies focused on how to use AI. And it will be interesting to see what this particular company does. I'll send you the link of the announcement, and you and I both can watch this company as it comes out, off the ground. I don't know much more about it than that, that's for sure. Hey, listen, as we look at the Mississippi legislature, I'm excited about sort of the mood that I hear coming out of the legislature this year. Now, some of this may be due to having a new speaker. Speaker White is going in there. I don't know him. I look forward to having him on the show. We've extended an invitation for him to join me for a full show because I want to tell a story, talk about coastal Mississippi and how it fits in. But talk about where he comes from and where his influences in his life was. But I'm really impressed with his practical communication, and I'm also impressed with his willingness to sort of go against go against sort of conventional thinking as it relates to some Republican agenda items. One is Medicaid expansion. Now, he's not promising Medicaid expansion. Let me be clear about that. What he's promising is that we should have a conversation about it. Is this potentially a solution to the number of working poor in the state of Mississippi? But while this is not a conversation about Medicaid expansion specifically, what I like about what I hear in the legislature, and I hear this being echoed by Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann, is that there's a spirit of we're going to tackle some things that we don't typically tackle. I think we're going to get some bipartisan support on some of those items. But it's good to see early in the process that we don't see people putting stakes in the ground already, isn't it?
It's been really fascinating to me to see how willing legislative leadership has been to really tackle some of these big issues. And that's not something historically that we always see, Ricky. I mean, usually the year after a big election, you just don't see a lot of controversial things come up. And it seems like this year is going to be the exception to that. But I think you're absolutely right. And, these next 4 years are going to be, I think, fascinating for sort of politicos or political watchers in Mississippi, because it has been a generation since we've really had a time when every statewide elected official is term limited out. It's been a long time since we've been in a situation where you're going to see a lot of turnover in various office holders, new governor, new lieutenant governor, new secretary of state, new state treasurer, new attorney general. And so there are going to be a lot of folks running. And so, it's going to be a bit of a free for all. And there are a lot of folks who are going to be interested in moving up and a lot of competition. And so I think this is going to be an interesting 4 years. And it's going to be interesting to see how the legislature sets the tone for that next 4 years through the things that they're tackling and taking on. And, as you mentioned, there's been some reluctance to take on a few of these issues over time. Certainly the signals coming out of Jackson right now is that there is going to be much more openness to taking on some of these big issues like Medicaid expansion, elimination of the income tax, which obviously is something the governor is pushing very hard. So this could be a time of incredible change in Mississippi in a public policy front. And I'm glad to be here for it. I'm glad to get to watch this all play out.
The ballot initiative. I mean, something we need to tackle. I mean, there have been significant disagreements on how to implement an approach since the Supreme Court made this decision. But something needs to be done there, and I think that they're at least open to having those conversations. The one that I think is important, and there's not a lot of disagreement at all about this, and that is that the governor has a big time economic development agenda. I mean, that's always been something he feels strongly about, and he puts his energy and his in his investment energy toward economic development in a big way, because he thinks one of the biggest ways for Mississippi to improve its standing is to create as many high-paying jobs as we possibly can. And by the way, he's totally right by that. And you think too about economic development on the state level. You think about the leaders that we have in the state that on the local level that are focused on economic development. We got Jackson County Economic Development Foundation. About the Economic Development Foundation led by our friend Joe Max Higgins, who's been on the show several times up in the Golden Triangle area. But we've got some talent in this state. And we're connecting the dots, and we're focused on it. And it's clear that if any big opportunities comes up, you've got a legislature that's focused on it. So, kudos to them for staying focused on that, because with all the other noise, you got to keep economic development front and center, don't you?
No question about it. I think that's one thing Governor Reeves has really been spot on with, and you can see the importance of it to him, as you noted. And it's interesting, Ricky, Mississippi in many ways is kind of the birthplace of modern economic development, starting all the way back with the Balanced Agriculture with Industry Act. And we've got some great practitioners in this state. Bill Cork, who was recently named as the new director of MDA, I think a lot of him, I don't say this lightly, I think he's probably one of the finest practitioners of economic development that I've ever seen. And so I think this could be a very competitive 4 years for Mississippi, considering the fact that you've got great alignment around the issue. Legislature understands the value of it. It's really the centerpiece for the governor. And you've got a lot of very talented local economic developers around Mississippi. And you're right, it is the place where we can continue to compete and punch above our weight. And so I don't think you can understate the importance of it. And, it's a big part of our business. I mean, we do a lot of economic development work. We work on a lot of economic development projects. And you really see out there the folks that do it well and the folks that don't do it so well. And so those best practices are really key. And we continue to see this sort of increasing leadership in that area. And I think that's going to be Mississippi's high point over the next 4 years.
I can't agree more. Jamie Miller, your predecessor at not predecessor, but who came in after you at the Gulf Coast Business Council. Jamie talked about Bill and reminded me, and we can remind the listeners the connection that you have with him. But he was executive director of the Port and Harbor Commission in Hancock County. You were there before he was there. And it's interesting how all these dots connect. But, if I had to pick one for him, like first of all, the fact that Bill Cork worked in coastal Mississippi is really important. So he understands the bookends. He understands Ingalls and Chevron and Stennis Space Center and so on. I think Hancock County was a good one for him to spend time in because he gets to understand the importance of rail. He gets to understand the importance of maritime. He knows about the blue chip industries that are part of Stennis. You guys have economic development, industrial parks that you're focused on over there. But I mean, that's a very diverse job. That particular job is a very diverse job, and he brings to the state a terrific understanding of how all these complex pieces fit together in coastal Mississippi, doesn't he?
Well, he absolutely does. And I'll tell you the thing that probably is most impressive about Bill Cork to me. He is a responsible steward as a practitioner. Look, one of the ways that people win in economic development is just throwing unlimited incentives and crazy money at developments and things of that nature, which ultimately don't really pencil out in the grand scheme of things. And so there are a lot of states that have given away the farm to attract businesses, and arguably, it's never really benefited them above what it cost them. Bill Cork is not one of those guys. I mean, we know if we take an economic development to him, he's going to go through it with a fine-tooth comb. He doesn't make bad deals for Mississippi. And he's got a reputation as a guy who's a really responsible steward of the state's resources and making sure that deals don't just work for the companies, but also work for the state and ultimately the locals. And so I think that's a place that he really shines. And I like that, as not only a person that works in the industry, but also a taxpayer. I like the fact that he's a good steward of making sure not only we're getting deals done, but we're also getting the right deals done.
Yeah, that's important. And of course, Jamie Miller had the opportunity to work with him when Jamie was at MDA, and said never went to a meeting where Bill didn't have an incredibly organized agenda and very focused. I mean, an ex-military guy, he's focused on the right things. Hey, when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Ashley Edwards. We'll see you after this. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show. I have my friend Ashley Edwards, who is a contributor to SuperTalk Mississippi News, former president and CEO of the Gulf Coast Business Council. He's an entrepreneur these days, and we love checking in with him, just talking about a wide variety of topics. Hey, one topic that we didn't talk about, and I want to circle back and just make sure we do, and that is the whole issue around education. And school choice is going to come up. Now, look, school choice, there's a pure approach to school choice that could be taken, and it might be taken. It's all going to be debated. I mean, but I think that so if you break it all down, there are some things within that they may be considering. For example, scholarships, for example, and can give public money to a family and let them decide where they want their kid to go to school, whether it's private school or public school. We have a Supreme Court ruling that's got to come down to really refine whether we can actually do that or not. But if the truth is, if you have means today, you have school choice. So a lot, and then some parents that really don't have the means, they're borrowing money, they're doing whatever they have to do, but they're also keeping the opportunity for their family to have school choice. So anytime that someone chooses to send their kid to a Catholic school, for example, my kids go to Catholic school, or went, and my grandkids go to Catholic school now. My daughter teaches at Catholic school. That's a form of school choice, okay? But there are a lot of families in this state that don't have the means, don't have the ability to make that decision, and their kids are going to schools that are not very good. I mean, that's just a fact, okay? And that's, by the way, Haley Barbour made the point in an editorial board meeting once that he had just left somewhere in central Mississippi a school, a public school, that had overperformed, and it was in one of the poorest areas of the state. And his point was that just because it's in a poor area doesn't mean it has to underperform. The reality is often it's who's leading that school district, okay? And we saw that during the pandemic. We saw some administrators embrace the pandemic and move quickly to use technology and whatever they needed to do to keep kids moving forward. And other administrators collapsed. And parents saw that. So the parents that were in schools where they moved forward and didn't get too far behind, they knew that was a good thing. And parents that were in situations that didn't have technological ability to do remote learning, et cetera, they saw that too, and they didn't like it. But they're stuck in those situations. They don't have the ability to make another decision that would allow their kids to get a great education. I think we got to solve that problem. I think school choice is something we're going to have a serious debate about. Do you have an opinion about it?
Look, I've always been a proponent for school choice. And, you look at, look, I'm a product of public education. All of my kids have gone their entire careers in public education. So I'm a supporter of public education. But you cannot have a serious conversation about this issue unless you acknowledge that in many ways those systems are broken. I'm lucky to live in Biloxi, where we have a great public school system, and my kids go to school there, and it's great. Not every parent is in a position like that. And, you look at a place like Mississippi, where we have more school districts than they have in a state like Florida with 10 times as many people. Over many years, over a generation, in many cases, some of these school districts have become fiefdoms for underperformance. You've seen situations, and State Auditor White has done a good job of giving some sunshine to this. But, where you've got administrators that, in failing school districts that make more than administrators in school districts that are performing well. And so when you start to just look at those metrics and you start to do that comparison and contrast, people have to have an alternative. And so if the state doesn't have the ability, or local boards don't have the ability to step in and do something about these failing school systems, you have to give parents a choice. And so, I think in many ways, this is going to be one of the key issues of sort of the next generational political age that we have in the United States, because more and more people are going to continue to see that they live in geographic areas where their kids are being left behind, and they're not going to stand for it. And so, if you can't step in and fire superintendents, if you can't step in and sort of turn these schools around because these fiefdoms exist, then you have to give people an alternative.
Right now, transferring from one district to the next is very difficult, if not nearly impossible, because right now the sending school has the power to veto. And so you just don't have. So I think there might be, again, we may not bite off the whole apple in this first round, but we're making it easier for students to transfer from one public school to the next. Maybe a step in the right direction. But something's got to be done. I mean, we all know this, that by creating broadband access, it was one of the most single biggest moves we've done in this state, by getting power co-ops involved in putting down miles and miles and miles of fiber optic to places in rural areas of Mississippi where 51% of Mississippians live. That's going to transform the access to high-speed internet. That's really important. That's going to be transformative. Other moves that we can make in education can help transform, and we just got to continue to be focused on that. The other thing is keeping community colleges and other focused on workforce training and the kind of things that we need to do that are being innovated by Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College, for example, where over 51% of their students are in non-traditional education. We got to focus on all those things. Well, we're out of time. It's been a pleasure to catch up with you, my friend.
Ricky, it's always great to see you, and keep up the good work you're doing. Always enjoy listening to your show.
Thank you, Ashley Edwards. We really appreciate you. Have a great day, and we will see you tomorrow.